Thank you, Jake. Happy to be here, and it's good to see you again. Likewise. I'm also looking forward to it. Yeah, it was that was a fun experience that we had together. It was a great way to meet. Sure. So I've been doing internal work for over 20 years. I got into Taoist inner alchemical practices and meditation and all that. I would actually even say it's probably closer to 30 years at this point. And and so that's always informed a lot of my approach to magic. And then I got into men's work a couple of years ago. Um, and what I found with that is that there was this rich, deep mythopoetic movement. It's kind of summarized by Robert Bly in the book Iron John. But what I found was that there was this rich, mythological and archetypical approach to men's work that was out there. And so that really fascinated me. And then as I continued doing a deep dive into more and more of the men's work, both in terms of the books out there that are available, and then also exploring different men's movements, I found that there were different iterations of this exploration. So, like of late, I've been, of course, involved with Mankind Project, but I've also been involved with Uncivilized Nation and Sacred Sons, and they have their own takes on men's work as well. And but what I find that all of them have in common is that there is a linkage and a connection between the spiritual. They might not necessarily call it magic, but the spiritual and men's work. And I think that that's a really important component because when we look at the crisis for men today, it's that men are out of touch with themselves, and they're out of touch with themselves in a number of different ways. They're out of touch with themselves physically in terms of how they take care of themselves. They're out of touch with themselves emotionally in terms of being heart centered and present with themselves, let alone with anybody else. They're out of touch with themselves mentally, and it looks like we lost your picture there, Jake. Um, yeah, yeah, they're out of touch mentally because they are caught up in all the stress and anxiety and fears of trying to be a man and trying to fit a specific image of masculinity. And then of course we have the spiritual aspect. And they're out of touch with that. They're out of touch with the primal and the divine power of their masculinity and of exploring that polarity in themselves in relationship to their inner feminine, and exploring it in the world around them. And so what ends up happening is that when we have this kind of huge disconnect, we see the kind of societal issues that occur where men are not really connecting in a powerful or meaningful way to themselves, let alone anyone else around them. And a common complaint that I hear, I think, from women when I talk about this kind of topic is that they feel like they're doing most of the emotional labor, and I think that's a fair complaint. But I also think that there's a spiritual labor component to that as well. Not that they're necessarily doing all the spiritual work, but that men aren't necessarily looking at how to access that deeper potential within themselves to show up. And when we have processes of initiation where people are going through some kind of experience and they're going in and they're doing their work, it's not just that they're doing work on the emotional level or on the mental level or on the physical level. It's also that they're doing work on the spiritual level. And that spiritual level may not be apparent right away. Usually what ends up happening with spiritual work is you plant a seed and then you watch as it ripples outward. But it's something that carries through in terms of the way that they live their lives, and it can actually steer the direction and course of their lives in very powerful ways that are initially very subtle, but then can be quite dramatic in a good way in terms of how things transform in their lives. But if men don't have, sacred space to connect with each other, and sacred space to go and do their deep work, and to celebrate that work as well, because that's one of the reasons we do ritual. It's not just as a rite of passage; it's also a rite of celebration. If they don't have that, it makes it really hard for them to change and transform from being a man in a patriarchal system, which basically doesn't serve anybody except for maybe very few, to a man who is in a system where it's much more liberated, where people are really truly meeting and connecting in a powerful and present way. And that's a huge part of what fascinates me about this connection, because magic is in and of itself a practice that is ideally designed toward liberating people, exploring their spirituality, but also exploring the intersection between the spiritual and the mundane world. I mean, a lot of magic is results based. So what are we really trying to do? We're trying to change our identities as well as change the way we relate to the world around us through magical work, and that's a huge part of men's work as well. Well, I think that we don't have the benefit of living in ancient times. I mean, we have historical records, and so we can look at those and see. But I do think it's pretty telling that in a lot of ways, the rise of monotheistic religions is where we see more of that patriarchal influence show up, as opposed to polytheistic religions where there was a more of a sense of sharing of power. At least that's what I would surmise based on what I see. But again, we don't know, we don't fully know, because we aren't living then. And the one of the perils of pop culture is that it's really easy to romanticize the past. It's really easy to like watch a show like Vikings or something else like that and be like, oh, well, they must have had an equal society. Well, we don't know for sure whether they did or didn't. They may very, I mean, the fact that women may, for example, have fought alongside men, kind of, or all that kind of speaks to there certainly being a different kind of power equation, as it were, that hasn't been so present for a long time. But I think that when we look at rites of like at the idea of like schools of mystery and things along those lines, and rites of passage and initiation, I think that it does create a healthy sense of connection to ourselves and to the spirit world and to other people around us, because we do kind of get a sense of, here's where I fit in, and here's how I fit into this culture. We don't live in a culture in the United States. We live in a society, and there's a very crucial difference there, because the society does not necessarily have a culture that is embedded within it. We instead we have lots of different cultures, which is not a bad thing. But then we also have like a homogenation. If we're white, which I am, you have a homogenation of whiteness, which in and of itself has created a lot of problems in the world, in terms of just the way white people have shown up at times, and in part, in terms of how they've treated indigenous people, but also in terms of the trauma they carry because they've been separated from their ethnic heritage and from, from the original spiritual beliefs that they came from. And of course, also even just carrying the trauma of, okay, like in my case, I know that my ancestors contributed to genocide. When they came over to the United States, like that's part of the trauma that I have to carry and work through, as well as acknowledging the trauma that on the indigenous people on that front. You see what I'm saying? Like there's all that aspect to explore. I think that when we have rites of passage and mystery, we do become a healthier society because we're given, or a healthier culture because we're given something essential that allows us to see the other people as people. Instead, what do we have now? We have at 16, maybe 17, you learn how to drive. Okay, that's not really a rite of passage. It is important, but it's not a rite of passage. At 18, you're able to smoke legally. you're able to um, you're able to vote and vote. Well, I don't know if anyone will see this today, but people go and vote if you haven't already. And then you have, legally at 21 you can drink, right? You can join the military incidentally at 18, but you can't drink until you're 21 legally anyway. But none of those are rites of passage. Those are just those are points of recognition of a sort, but they're not rites of passage. And a rite of passage should be transformative in a real and meaningful way, and it should instill a sense of, oh, here's where I need to step up as a person and take more responsibility for my life and more responsibility for the way I show up in the world. And that's what we don't have, and that's why I think there's such a significant problem for the majority of men out there. I mean, fortunately, we do have, the men's movement where we're seeing this. And it was as I was talking with a colleague the other day that one of the things that we both kind of hope is that, a couple hundred years down the line, that this work won't be needed in the same way that it is now. And who knows? I won't be around by then. Neither will you. But hopefully it will be the case because we really need to transform and change what has become a real poison in our society because it's created a huge disconnect. And it's not even just a disconnect between men and women or between people that identify as other genders. It's a disconnect with the world as well. We see it with, the climate change. We see it with the kind of the callous attitude toward pollution, and toward the impact that we have on our planet. And the funny thing is, and this is a really good point to consider, is like the planet will continue to exist, but humanity may not if we don't take better care of our planet. But where does that begin? First and foremost, that begins with our relationship with ourselves, because as we transform our relationship with ourselves and each other, then we start to become more aware of the ecological and environmental impact that we're having. And we start transforming our relationship with the life around us. We start, connecting with the spirits of the land, and we start asking ourselves, is this how I really want to show up? And we go back toward what I would hope would be more of a collaborative approach toward living life. So that, this work isn't just about, oh, I'm going to go away for a weekend and do some navel gazing and maybe come back and be a better person. This work is going to ideally transform your life in significant ways because it's going to help you recognize the impact of your life on those around you and also on everything else that you happen to cohabitate with. An initiation for a modern man is going to be a transformation of his relationship with himself, his relationship with other people. And it first and foremost starts with an acknowledgement that this man is afraid and angry and anxious and stressed out like everyone else, and that he can let down his shields and his guards and actually see that he is not alone. When a man can see that he is not alone, that he doesn't have to white knuckle it and lone wolf it through life, which is the overarching stereotype that's associated with men, that he can be vulnerable and open up and connect with other people, that's when he can start to transform his life. But that's not going to happen in an everyday container. Some form of initiation needs to happen. And it can happen in different ways. I mean, I'll share what got me into men's work was a really harsh breakup with somebody. I had gotten divorced the year before. I got into a rebound relationship, which is not a good idea. Like, really, if you're getting divorced, wait a year at least and do that work. But I didn't do it, so learn from my mistakes. And so I got into that relationship. The person was an alcoholic and a narcissist, and by the time it was all said and done, I came out the other side like just utterly broken by this person. But there was a blessing there because this person really caused me to see just how disconnected I was from life and how alone I was. I didn't have any friends where I was living at the time. I was working a day job and then I was doing DoorDash at night. And then I was seeing this person on occasion. And now this person was out of my life. So I didn't have any connection at all. And I remember that morning laying there just being utterly broken, and I'm like, what am I going to do about myself? Like, I'm a mess, and I just keep making the same mistake. And what'll happen is I'll meet somebody else and this will repeat, and it's like I can't do that anymore. I have to figure this out. And I later that day I'm scrolling through Facebook and I happen to see this course for like a breakup course. I signed up for it because I'm like, I don't know how to handle breakups. And in the process of that, I'm like, oh, here's these resources on the men's work, Iron John and Magician Warrior King Lever and a couple of other things. So I started reading those books. I didn't reach out to another man for a good 6 months, but that was the start of my initiatory journey. And I would say that it was a process where, I mean, for the 6 months were not easy months. It wasn't like I suddenly found men's work and it was like, oh, everything's better. No, I mean, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I wanted in my life. I was feeling like really crappy about myself. And, reading those books kind of gave me a direction. At the same time, I'm like, is there anyone else out there doing this work? And then, it's 6 months later, I happened to have written an article about sacred masculinity, and a fan of mine said, hey, have you heard of the Mankind Project? No. Like, all right, I should Google that. I Googled it, and I signed up for the free Zoom session that night that they had and got on there. And the first few minutes, I'm anxious and stressed out. I'm thinking these guys are going to laugh at me because that's what we are conditioned as men to believe. That's the bro code. That's the man code, right? That's in place, the man box, where we have this idea that we're all out against each other. That's what we've learned growing up. That's what young boys learn. It's what we learn as teenagers. And it's what we learn in college, that we can't really trust the other men around us. They're going to steal our partner. They're going to outdrink us. They're going to outfight us. They're going to out whatever. And, we're always going to be competing. That's basically what we get. So that's kind of where I come into this Zoom session, and I'm nervous. And then, the facilitator asks a very simple question, and people start opening up. And I'm like, the first thought I had in my mind was, I'm not alone, because here are these other men sharing their fears, their anxieties, their stresses. their experiences of getting divorced or broken up or whatever it is that they're going through. And I'm like, I can identify with every single one of these men. That's when my journey really began, because you can't do initiation on your own. And this is what ends up happening is a lot of people try to even go through this work on their own. And you can get so far. I mean, like I said, I've done inner work for most of my life, or at least a good chunk of it, a good half of it now, I'd say. And I'm not saying I didn't benefit from it. I definitely did. But when I got into men's work, it was like a quantum leap in terms of that work and how it transformed my life, because I wasn't alone. I had other people I could relate to and connect with, and other people to hold me accountable and make sure that I was really doing the work. And at a certain point, it's true that you as a person have to get into integrity with yourself and hold yourself responsible. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many other people are in your life. If you don't have the strength to hold yourself in integrity and responsibility, it doesn't matter how many of those people are there. They can't do that for you. But it's good at the beginning of that journey to realize, oh, I have other people that I can quote unquote report to who will lovingly hold me accountable to my work. And so, once I did that, that's when the process of change really began, because I started to come out of my shell and I'm like, oh, I can change who I am. And when I went away on my own first men's weekend, which was through MKP, the New Warrior Training Adventure, which I highly recommend to anyone watching this, because I think it is absolutely an amazing experience. What ended up happening is, I kind of went through an underworld journey, and I came out the other side a changed person. I wasn't the same person because I had come to a place of healing and work. And of course that didn't mean, again, it didn't mean that everything was all of a sudden like better. I still, continued to make mistakes and do all that other stuff. I mean, but it's just that my life began to change direction in a really positive way. And since then, the various experiences that I've had, whether I've staffed at a weekend or I've gone through other initiatory experiences in this capacity, which I've done a few, and I'm actually getting ready. At the time of this recording, I'm actually getting ready to do 2 weekends in a row of men's work. I'm going to an immersion event through Sacred Sons, and then I'm going through Prime Leadership, which is their leadership training, the week after. So, I mean, I'm going to be going through these some more initiatory experiences. And it's interesting because as you go through these experiences, it's also like you're opening the door for personality changes. I went from being a quote unquote stereotypical nice guy with covert contracts and passive aggressiveness and not really speaking up to a much more assertive and confident and powerful embodied man. I mean, that's what this work does. I used to be a nice guy. I wouldn't speak up for what I needed or wanted. I would just keep it all in, and I kind of expected that my partner would figure it out. But they never did, because how could they? I wasn't saying anything. And now it's like, yeah, I'm speaking up for what I want. I'm saying yes to myself. I'm going out there, and I mean, I left my day job earlier this year. I'm in the process of creating a very stable business, foundational business, both around men's work, my spiritual work, and other things along those lines, because I decided to say yes to myself. And I just was like, I'm going for it. I'm going for what I want, for life on my terms. And that's part of what this work does, is it teaches us to stop settling for less, stop settling for a small life where it's like, yeah, you get that job where you're just surviving, and you're in that relationship where neither of you is really happy, but hey, at least it's better than being alone. No, it's not. I'd rather be alone than be with somebody I'm miserable with, because at least I'm more content and happy with myself. That's the realizations that this work brings us. And here's the deal. I'm not really alone. I can pick up a phone and call a man anytime. I've got a network of brothers to call, and I've got some wonderful soul sisters to connect with as well, and people who identify as otherwise. I can call any of those people and connect at any time. I'm not alone. But we are alone when we settle for small, when we settle for a small life. And that's why we do this initiatory work, because it transforms it's not just a transformation of the self, it's a transformation of your overall life. And it's kind of a reckoning of like, what do I need to do to step up and become the mature embodied adult that I can be? And I say mature embodied adult because there's also women's work out there. There's other forms of work. This isn't just for men. And there's even weekends where men and women will come together and do this work. I went through one during the fall equinox this year, and I'm doing one in the beginning of December. And that work is just as powerful and as important because we need to heal those kinds of relational bonds as well. We can't do that all on our own. Sure. I have a few different covert scripts I can speak to. Um, if I take her out to dinner, I take her on a really good date. We have a great time. When we get home, she's going to have sex with me. That's a covert contract if nothing's said. If I don't speak up and say, "Hey, I'd like to have some sex tonight," and a lot of men won't do that. We'll just kind of hope. Well, maybe she'll have sex with me, or if you're into like kink or some other form of different sexual exploration, or you want to do sex magic or something like that. But again, you don't speak up. You don't say anything. Okay, well, here I am again in the missionary position. Woo woo, lots of fun. Not necessarily. I mean, that's one obvious example, but another example would be um, this person and I, we're at home together, we're doing chores and errands, but I really want to sit down and have a meaningful talk, or I want to go and do a qigong practice with them, or I want to plan out a vacation or a trip, or I want to speak about the fact that like my parents are getting older and I'm worried about them, or anything like that, but I don't say anything. Those are all covert scripts. Or I'm unhappy at my job and I don't know what to do about it and I feel like I have to stay at this job and I don't say anything about it. That's a covert script. Covert contracts essentially are anything that is left unsaid. And why? Why do people not say it? Well, because we are afraid to be vulnerable. Here's the reality. Nobody is obligated to satisfy your needs. If I speak up and I say, I want XX, the other person doesn't have to agree to it. But here's the beauty. What can happen is that person can listen and acknowledge. And then at that point, it comes down to, can we come to an agreement? Can we come to some kind of understanding? Not necessarily an agreement that means that she says yes. I want to be clear about that, but just an agreement of some sort. Okay, I understand that you have this interest in kink, but that's not something that really works for me. Well, what can we do about that? Well, maybe you can go to a local play party and find someone there to play with, as an example. Again, that depends on what your relationship dynamic is and stuff like that. I mean, I think a huge part of the problem too, and this goes hand in hand with covert contracts, is that men, when they date, don't date with the understanding that they are looking to find somebody that has similar values. They date because, oh, that person's hot. Well, problem is with that person's hot is that's a very surface level. That's objectifying that person, but it's also objectifying the man. And that's not something that's really observed or noted, but it's true. When we objectify other people, we also objectify ourselves. So we're dehumanizing ourselves, we're stripping out. And that's part of what covert contracts does. If I'm making a covert contract, I am objectifying that person. I'm also objectifying myself. I'm not in touch with myself. And one of the most important things that we really need to do is we need to be in touch with ourselves. And that means that if I, for example, get into a relationship with somebody, I might want to spend the time slowly getting to know them and also making sure that their values and my values align, at least enough that there is enough compatibility that if we enter into a romantic sexual relationship, that there's a mutual and enthusiastic yes. Because if there isn't, then that creates all kinds of chaos and havoc and misery, and like neither person deserves that. I think that, and I want to also note that these covert contracts don't just come from men; they come from women as well. There are covert contracts in place in general. There's a really good book called No More Mr. Nice Guy by Dr. Robert Glover, which I highly recommend. And, there's classes and stuff out there. I have a program I'm developing right now called the Sovereign Code, which in part deals with covert contracts, but also deals with some other aspects of men's work. It's really designed to be a self-study course where you're able to do a deep dive into your core values and your behaviors that are expressions of those values, so that you show up in the world differently. And again, I still feel like even with like a self-study course like that ideally you're still going through some kind of initiatory experience with other people, because you cannot fully integrate stuff like that just on your own. I've yet to see that happen. I have found that a lot of that work has helped me. I've gone through some self-study courses myself, and they've helped a lot. And yet having the mirror of other people and kind of that shared experience is what really cements in those kinds of changes. Mm-hmm. I started out with self-teaching myself with magic. I mean, I was 16 years old. It was the 1990s. There wasn't a profusion of elders about and around that could teach, and I was living in rural Pennsylvania. So I think that there is real value in teaching yourself, and I learned a lot. I mean, I self-initiated myself into neo shamanism and elemental hermeticism at first. Then I got into like the Golden Dawn system of ceremonial magic. I read the book by the Ciceros and went through and did the practices. And then I got into more ceremonial magic and ritual magic and chaos magic and Taoism, Doshin, Tantra. And then I developed my own systems of magic. So I won't knock that. I think that there is some real value to doing that work. It requires a lot of discipline, and a lot of focus and effort. I mean, I've been practicing magic every day to one form or another for the last 31 years. Think about that. There are a lot of people out there that I meet that don't, that quote unquote say they practice magic, and they really don't. They might do a magical working once in a while or a spell here and there. And I'm not knocking them, but I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna call a spade, I'm not gonna call them a magician. A magician does their work every day. That's just the kind of the reality of that. Um, Even when I have periods where I'm not doing a lot of active magical work, I'm still doing daily work, whether it's Qigong or a sphere of artwork or stuff like that. And I also think at the same time that there is real value in group work with magic. Over the years, I've organized groups myself to do experiments, and I've also gone through a couple of different systems and traditions, including the fire temple tradition that's run by R.J. Stewart and Anastasia Nutt, and I've gotten some real value out of those systems and doing that work and experiencing those spiritual transmissions. I've given spiritual transmissions out myself through my work, um, and through the development of my own unique systems of magic, of which there are more than a few that I've put together out there, and I'm still working on some more. And group work matters. I mean, I'm teaching a class on advanced space time magic right now. It was like a 4-week course. We're wrapping up this week, and even though it's online via Zoom, there's still a shared transmission. There's still a shared experience that's going on there. I'm seeding the consciousness of those people with the instructions that I'm sharing. So I definitely think there's room for both. I don't think that one way that it's a one way or the other approach. I think that if you're going to practice magic, here's a saying that I have: challenge what you know to discover what you can learn. So I'd put out there to every single one of your listeners to, what is like this. It's blinders, right? But what you can discover is here. So remove the blinders and discover. And that means that you have to necessarily put yourself into some situations and experiences that are not going to be comfortable. That's the process of initiation. So if you're someone who is only self-initiated, my response to you is go out and do some group work. Go out and take some classes with some of these elders and go through like a weekend of their work and see how that transforms your understanding of magic. And if you're someone who's only ever done group work, my challenge to you is pick up Franz Barden's Initiation into Hermetics and work the program. Work it. See what happens. I mean, I worked that program many years ago, and it was really powerful and helpful. I don't think that you can really know yourself or really know what you can achieve magically or in any other way without challenging what you know to discover what you can learn. And that's really what's informed my entire spiritual life and really my entire life. I've always asked questions, and I've always challenged what I thought I knew and been open to how other people challenging me. I mean, even in my books, one of the things that I write is like, look, don't take what I share here as gospel truth. Read it, learn from it, and then experiment with it. And if you come up with something better or different, then hey, more power to you. Because that is honestly the highest compliment that you could pay to anybody, is to take their work, go through it, and then develop your own understanding and nuances with it. Now, not everyone will feel that way. There are elders who will be like, you have to do it this way. And my response to those elders is challenge what you know to discover what you can learn. Yes, it could. It's why it's one of my catchphrases. So I do have an upcoming class actually starting on December 10th of 2024, which is Advanced Inner Alchemy of Wintering, where what we're going to actually do is attune to the rhythmic energy of the season of winter, and then use that to go into an underworld initiatory experience where we're going to do some shadow work and experience endarkenment, and then come out the other side finding the light. This is a 3-month class. We're going to meet, I think it's going to be like the the second and fourth Tuesday of each month. And we're going to also be doing a solstice ritual. And this is going to be all online, but nonetheless, because that's how I teach most of these classes. And then I have classes that I'll be teaching that I teach throughout the year for the magical stuff. And, so I'll have some other classes coming up. I don't have them all planned out yet. I have a pretty good idea of what they'll be, but those will be coming up. And if you subscribe to my magical experiment Substack or subscribe to my e-list, you'll find out about those. And of course I post them. And then for the men's work, I'm developing as I mentioned earlier, this Sovereign Code program. My goal is to have it out by the beginning of this next year. And that really is going to be a program around, instilling specific values and codes of behavior that will be transformative. And it's really intended to be a year-long process. Like, you sign up for the course, do year-long work. There will be an option where you'll be able to connect with me live for some of the, also, like, it'll be a self-study course, but there will be a live component as well. And, it's really designed on the idea of, like, we're going to go and do this really deep work on ourselves and become the sovereigns of our lives. Because when we become the sovereigns of our lives, we are better for it. And then I'm also continuing to write. I just put out my first book on the men's work, which is called The Quest for Mature Masculinity, where I introduce some of the spiritual components, like doing ancestor work, for example, shadow work, things along those lines. And that just came out in September of this year. And I'm working on a book right now called Walking with Daemonic Spirits, where I share basically my system for how to work with daemonic spirits or spirits of wisdom and get better results in your life, but also develop collaborative relationships with them, as opposed to coercive transactive relationships, which is what you see in, like, the grimoire traditions, as an example. Daemonic, but some people will also can kind of think of it as demonic. I use the word daemon because that is the original word, and it refers to the spirit of wisdom. I think that the word demonic is basically a corruption of that, and of course it's because Christianity was like, hey, we don't want you working with these spirits, so we're going to make them evil. Well, I think that here's what I found. One, never underestimate the ability for humans to categorize, and in the process of categorization, try to control what they don't understand. Spirit work, if we look at the majority of books out there and everything else, it's based on a humanocentric perspective. I want the spirit to appear before me in a human form. I want it to speak my language, and I want it to go and do things for me. Okay, that's basically humanocentric thinking. So we have to really question that. Is there a spectrum? I think it has more to do with kind of the role that spirits seem to play. So you have your elemental spirits and your nature spirits, for example, and you have your daemonic and your angelic. You have your deities, etc. But here's the rub. I think that all of these spirits have their own perspective and experience, and it's decidedly not human. And when we open ourselves up to experiencing that through somatic experiencing and direct mediation of the spiritual transmissions, we can discover that there is a lot more going on there in that interaction. And we also have to really question, why do spirits want to work with us? We know why we want to work with spirits. Oh, I want to get results. I want to get information. I want this. I want that. Well, why do spirits want to work with us? And my pet theory is that really spirits want to work with us because we ground them. We are spirits made flesh. We are manifestations of form. And when you look at magic as a process, what are you really doing? You're taking a possibility, it's up here, and you're exchanging power for essence, or power and essence for form and manifestation. So I have the potentiality of many different possibilities, and how do I bring that down into reality? That's what we have. That's our unique